If you stayed up late to watch Syracuse men's basketball take on Stanford, you probably turned the TV off after an abysmal start for the Orange, and I wouldn't have blamed you. Now, SU ended up making it a game, but couldn't quite pull off the comeback in the end to lose its third in a row. We're glad you're still awake and watching us, because we're about to break it all down next on Orange Press Pass, which starts right now. And welcome in to our CitrusTV studio. Alongside Nicholas Waley and Nathaniel Cunningham, I'm Sam Reis for a late night, early morning, whatever you want to call it, edition of Orange Press Pass after Syracuse falls to Stanford, loses its third straight game. And guys, let's cut right to the chase, because this was an ugly start to this game for the Orange. They made it a game in the end. I guess that's a positive, Nick, but what are your first thoughts and takeaways from this one?
I mean, it really was a roller coaster of just so many emotions throughout this game. Like we mentioned, the start of the game, they were 25-2 at one point. They got down by 23 points. Syracuse only made 2 baskets in the entire first 10 minutes of this game. Then all of a sudden, it completely turned the other way. Went from the complete low to the high. Syracuse outplayed Stanford for the rest of the game, outscored them anyway for the final 30 minutes of action. But then Syracuse down the stretch, few too many mistakes, few too many turnovers, once again letting them down the stretch. And in the end, Stanford, who looked like they could even be a tournament team with the way they've been playing recently, get the win by 9.
I mean, Nick, you kind of took my first thought, and you said it a little bit there. What are we doing? This was a winnable basketball game. You held Stanford off. You did what you needed to do to make this a close game, and with 3 minutes left, you had an opportunity at a big rebound. You let Stanford get it. They scored a second chance point. Then this game is a 7-point game. You stop them, you trap them at the half-court line, and then you allow them to somehow get to the rack, get a shot off, they miss, and then you don't get the rebound again. What is this team doing? It's the fundamental little things that lost Syracuse this game. I think that's what's the most aggravating, is that this was winnable, and Syracuse lost.
Well, you heard it right there. A winnable game and a frustrated Nate Cunningham after this one for Syracuse. And the Orange played at Maples Pavilion out in the Bay Area for the first time ever, thanks to the conference realignment. Let's tell you how we got there in the end. Between Syracuse and Stanford, a late night Wednesday night battle. And my goodness, we already referenced it a bit, but this was one of the ugliest starts I've ever seen. And it all started 30 seconds in with Maxime Reynaud, one of the best players in the country, knocking down a triple. A few minutes later, Jalen Blakes, I should say, with the jumper, 14-0. You see the score. It was 17-0 at one point. I mean, are you kidding me? 7.5 minutes in, Kyle Cuff finally says, I'll bank one in for 2 and put Syracuse on the board. Now we fast forward a little bit, and the Orange are actually back into this game. They made it a little bit interesting. J.J. Starling gets the cross-court feed. He knocks down the triple. This was a 9-point game at the half, as Syracuse somehow made things interesting heading into the second half. Now, you heard the name Jalen Blakes earlier, and he continued to do his thing for Stanford in addition to Reynaud. The layup good to put Stanford up by 12. Now, the Orange stuck around. Chris Bell, corner 3, you bet, plus the foul. That made it a 9-point game at the time. Syracuse staying within single digits. And how about Jaquan Carlos tonight? Off the bench, 16 points for the Hofstra transfer, including that 3 right there. Syracuse within 8. Now a 10-point game at this stage with under 7 minutes to go. Peter Majstorovic called for a little bit of a ticky-tack foul, you could say. He's a little frustrated with the decision. Adrian Autry is frustrated with the decision. He has given it to the referee a little bit. Syracuse has to deal with it. Now, it was a 6-point game at this stage, but J.J. Starling turns it over. A feed inside. Lampkin can't handle it, and then this was really the dagger. Reynaud drains the free throw. Another double-double for the 7'1" Frenchman. 70-61. Stanford gets the job done, and in the end, guys, it was a slow start for the Orange that bit them, because they had a chance to win this, as you referenced earlier, Nate.
Yeah, well, I think what makes it really frustrating is seeing all those opportunities. But you have to give credit to the Orange, specifically Syracuse's bench that stepped up, had more points than the starting lineup did combined, the 4 players that came off the bench. So they did a really good job at just keeping Syracuse in this game.
I think the main thing as well, especially like I mentioned down the stretch, were those turnovers. Stanford had 19 points off of turnovers, Syracuse only 10. And that big number 9 in terms of points is the difference maker in this game. Syracuse, like you mentioned, Nate, they had this game. If they didn't make the mistakes, they could have been there.
Well, you saw it right there on your screen. Another loss for Syracuse, now 9-12 overall. 3-7 in ACC play. A very frustrating season so far for the Orange that's continued. What's not frustrating is talking to our reporter, Peter Elliott, who is 2,823 miles west of our CitrusTV studio out at the Maples Pavilion in Palo Alto, California. Peter, first and foremost, I hope the Bay Area is treating you well on this fine Wednesday night. And first question I have for you is, was there anything Adrian Autry revealed after the game, post-game in his presser, in terms of what he said, what the message was to his guys after what was a terrible start, trailing by 23 so early on?
Hey, Sam, at this point, Adrian Autry could reveal his tricks in a manual, a book, because he is an expert at this point about what to do when your college basketball team gets down in a hole and how do you come out of it. It has happened so many times this season. It certainly happened again in this game. This was the worst start of this season, a 23-point deficit. After the game, he said, you just got to make it simple. It's about getting one stop at a time and turning the game into 4-minute games, in between each media timeout. And that did work for the Orange. It was successful, especially in the second half as they clawed back, got within 6. It's just so tough to win college basketball games, tough to win basketball games at any level when you go down by 23 points so early. It was really reminiscent, especially of that Notre Dame game, when at some point the Orange went down by 17 points in the first half. The Orange came back in that one. They ended up winning it, but I think 23 points against a team like this, especially against a team with Maxime Renaud, it's just so tough to go down by that much and end up trying to claw back. They got within 6, but it was just too much in the end, Sam. Adrian Autry just couldn't get his team to win.
Hey, Peter, Nick Waley here. We talked about Maxime Renaud, another double-double for him today, now his 17th of the season. He's quickly becoming not just one of the best players in the ACC, but arguably the country, and he's put his team in a position where they could make the NCAA tournament. Up against guys like Eddie Lampkin and Jair Davis, 2 very physical presences down low. Why was the Frenchman able to dominate them so well tonight?
Yeah, Nick, you mentioned Frenchman. Maxime Renaud is 7 feet tall, plus he can play on both ends of the floor. He can shoot threes, he can erase shots, he affects every part of the game. Does that remind you of a fellow countryman? Yeah, he's not exactly Victor Wembanyama just yet, but this is a guy who Adrian Autry said could have an absolute future in the NBA. He certainly was all over this game, especially in the first half. He had a double-double after 20 minutes, 11 points and 11 rebounds, and he was just faster, more physical than Eddie Lampkin. That was just a clear mismatch. That's where you're really missing a guy like Donnie Freeman, who for the 7th straight game was out with a foot injury. That's a guy who matches up much closer to Maxime Renaud than Eddie Lampkin. But in the second half, you could see, not that they figured him out, but he was less effective, I'd say, in the second half. He didn't score as much, and certainly didn't clean up on the glass as much. In the end, I think you got to look at the whole picture here. Maxime Renaud leads the ACC in points. He averages 20.5 points a game. He finished this game with 21 points. That's a pretty good defensive effort from the Orange if you're holding the ACC's leading scorer to just about his scoring average. After the game, Adrian Autry said he's going to get his fair share, essentially saying there's only so much you can do against a guy like that. I think if you're Syracuse, you got to be pretty proud with the defensive effort.
Hey, Peter, you talked about looking at the big picture. Let's talk about some nice things for Syracuse for a little bit. Syracuse's bench actually outscored the starting unit by 3 points today. They scored 32 points. The starters only tallied 29. What did you see out of the secondary unit that allowed them to see so much success against this Cardinal defense?
Nate, that's a great spin zone there. You've got a future in political communications because, yes, you could look at it as, hey, that's a great effort from the bench, but it also means it was a pretty tough effort to start from the starting unit. You know, when you got guys like Elijah Moore, who put up another goose egg tonight, scoring 0 points, and Lucas Taylor, who scored just 3 points. almost anyone who's coming off the bench is going to have a better performance in this game. Jaquan Carlos was huge in this game, probably the best contest of his season, scoring 16 points, a perfect 6 of 6 from the field. He was excellent tonight, and I think Adrian Autry really should look at mixing up the starting lineup. I know coaches always talk about how you don't want to do that because it's going to mess with confidence, but at this point, when you've had guys like Lucas Taylor and Elijah Moore who have struggled so much throughout the season, that is what is putting Syracuse in these holes. These are guys who are starting games, and then Syracuse goes down by, whether it be 17 against Notre Dame or 23 tonight against Stanford. That's the reason for your struggles. So when guys off the bench are playing much better, then I think you got to rearrange who is starting this game. So yes, Nate, that's a good way of looking at it here. The bench had a pretty good game. Better Majstorovic, Kyle Cuff, and Chris Bell. Solid efforts tonight. Better than the starters.
Yeah, in the end, the bench did its job. The starters not so much, and Syracuse falls short. Peter, we thank you so much for taking the time. Fantastic coverage, as always, for Citrus TV, and safe travels back from the West Coast. All right, we're up against our first break here on Orange Press Pass, but guess what? The fun is just getting started here on a late-night edition of OPP. We'll be back for more to break down another Syracuse loss against Stanford. Don't go anywhere. And just like that, we're back on your favorite show, Orange Press Pass, alongside Nicholas Waley and Nathaniel Cunningham. I'm Sam Reis. We're still awake. We're still bringing the energy. We hope you're hanging in there as well, reacting to another loss for Syracuse on the road against Stanford, 70-61, the final out in Palo Alto. And guys, we talked about it briefly in the last segment, but you got to go back to that first half because that was a crazy first half, to say the least. Stanford up 25-2 just 9 minutes in. Then Syracuse goes on a 22-8 run in itself. It's another slow start, though, for this Orange team, Nick, and that's what hurt them in the end.
It really did, because in the end, it was only a 9-point difference. I mean, if Syracuse are able to hit a couple of those shots, maybe limit those really early turnovers that we saw, which created just that momentum that Stanford had in the opening 10 minutes, maybe Syracuse would have been in this game right towards the end. I mean, if we get down 25-2 and you only score 2 shots in the entire first 10 minutes of this game, and then all of a sudden you go 22-8 to end the first half. I mean, it's so hard to recover from that. And Syracuse, to be fair to Coach Adrian Autry, he did what he was hired to do. Made the adjustments. Like Jaquan Carlos and Kyle Cuff, they were brilliant off the bench tonight, and they scored 11 points off the bench in the opening, in the first half. And of course, we already mentioned Jaquan Carlos, 6 for 6 on the day. I mean, this is a guy who's averaging just 38% from the field this season. He was able to step up to the plate, but that's what Syracuse has been missing all season. The guys off the bench or even in the starting five, especially tonight, not stepping up to the plate.
Well, I think the biggest thing here is the fact that you're still dealing with an injured Donnie Freeman. And I can't express how important his absence has been for Syracuse. When you're talking about a guy that opens up the court, that can be on the perimeter, but also provide a presence inside, it would take a little bit of stress off of Eddie Lampkin. It would take a little bit of stress off of some of those supporting pieces to make shots. Let's not forget that this is a guy that was top 20 in the ACC in scoring prior to his injury. He is a talented player. When he comes back, he's really going to help out the Syracuse squad.
And that'll help out the Syracuse squad. What could also help out the Orange guys is actually protecting the basketball. Now, never mind the deficit they face, Nate, but the Syracuse turned it over 14 times. 5 of those giveaways was in the first 10 minutes. This is a recurring issue, isn't it, for the Syracuse team?
Well, it's definitely a recurring issue because this is the 3rd game in their last 5 that they've had at least 14 turnovers. Yeah. So really not ideal from the Orange to be turning the ball over, but more importantly, it's what those turnovers lead to. You're talking about 19 points off of the turnovers for Syracuse. It's not that bad that you're turning the ball over. It's that those turnovers are directly resulting in points for the opposing team. That's the biggest issue for SU so far.
And every point does count, especially in those early moments. Those turnovers and those points off of turnovers for Stanford really made a big difference. And in transition, Syracuse just couldn't get back, couldn't recover defensively. Stanford had 10 more points off of turnovers than Syracuse did in this game. I mean, when the scoreline is in single digits, I mean, that is the difference maker. If Syracuse is able to limit that, at least cut that deficit in half, I mean, Syracuse will be in it right to the end. I mean, of course, there's other factors involved, but look, it's about the finer details, and Syracuse has had an issue with that all year.
Right, it's those finer details, something Syracuse hasn't managed to figure out as we're ready to flip the calendar to February, and still not a lot of answers for this Orange team, and they didn't have much of an answer for the 7'1" Frenchman, Maxime Reynaud. I mean, this guy is worth talking about because he is special. I know I personally, Nick, haven't watched much Stanford basketball at all, heard about all the hype, and he's worth all of that hype with another 20-plus point performance.
I mean, the fact that he has more double-doubles than anyone else in the country. And
it's a lot of double-doubles.
It's a lot of double-doubles. And the next closest is like 12 or 13. It's not.
Eddie Lampkin can only dream.
Exactly. And I mean, the way that he's just so effortless, and yes, he had a little bit of a poor shooting night tonight, especially from beyond the arc, but he had a double-double within the first half. I mean, this guy is going to be a lottery pick. I think that's almost guaranteed at this point. He keeps improving with every game he's got. 3rd in the nation for points per game. And especially in the ACC, yes, it's a little bit weaker this year, but for whatever reason, it's bringing the Stanford team to the forefront, and it's going to make them a real contender when March comes around. I mean, all of a sudden, they're starting to be put on the fringes of brackets. So I wouldn't be surprised if this guy could be even a top 3 pick in the upcoming draft.
And you say what happens in March. Anything can happen in March. It's madness for a reason. But I think I want to go back to something you mentioned, which is the fact that he had a little bit of a poor shooting night from beyond the arc. He went 3 for 10. But I think that's the point. The fact that a 7'1" center is taking 10 threes in a game is something that's not really heard of. And you heard a reporter, Peter Elliott, comparing him to Victor Wembanyama. That's only something that Wemby does. So to have a guy that's that tall, that's that skilled, who can put up 21 and 15, led Stanford in all categories, by the way, and shoot the deep ball that well, it's just special to see somebody like that.
He may be a long way from home, but he feels like he's at home for the Cardinal for sure.
Absolutely.
You guys hit the nail on the head. Maxime Reynaud balling out this season for Stanford, and that weaves nicely into our player of the game. Who else could it be? It's Maxime Reynaud. I'm not going to tease you. It's an easy answer. This guy is the real deal, as the guys at the desk touched on. 21 points, 15 rebounds. He secured a 17th double-double of the season inside the first 15 minutes of this game. Oh yeah, he also knocked down 3 triples, by the way. None of his teammates had more than 1. He's Mr. Do-It-All. He's led in every statistical category. Maxime Reynaud is special, and he is the player of the game. All right, we're up against another break here on Orange Press Pass, but worry not, because after a break, we're going to look a little more big picture with the Syracuse team. Don't go anywhere. Things roll on after this.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average 4-legged homie, and then wham, bam, minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high five.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
Welcome back into Orange Press Pass. Your favorite trio is now at the wall. Alongside Nicholas Waley and Nathaniel Cunningham, I'm Sam Reis. I promised you that we'd look a little big picture with the Syracuse team. So another loss, 70-61 tonight against Stanford. But we already touched on it a little bit, Nick. An issue that is happening over and over are these slow starts for the Orange. Down 25-2 tonight. Peter Elliott, our reporter, mentioned it. They were down 11-0 early in that Notre Dame game and came back. Is it fair to question the starting five that Adrian Autry is putting out there?
I think absolutely, especially considering the fact that the bench scored 32 points on their own today. I think it's a really important issue that Coach Adrian Autry's had to settle with for most of this season, especially with the injuries had to J.J. Starling, Donnie Freeman as well. Without those two big stars consistently available, it's made it very difficult to have a consistent starting five. So that means the starting five can't gel together. But as well, the Syracuse team outscored the Cardinal in the final 28 minutes of this game. If the starting five could do that job, Syracuse would have been in a better position.
Well, you talk about the starting five. How about J.J. Starling? Really just had an off game. And the simple fact about it is that when J.J. plays well, this team plays well. They want to act like they're football and not inside the first quarter. That matters. The first half matters. They got to play well.
And right along that point, Nate, we talked about it earlier. The SU bench outscored SU starters by 3 points in this one. You looked at it in a more positive light, considering what the bench did and Jaquan Carlos playing well, but this has to be concerning as well.
It's definitely a little bit concerning, especially because Jaquan Carlos has had a little bit of rough patches over the beginning of the season, but to have him have a game like he had today, really good to see a little bit of upside out of him. And a couple of those other performers, Peter Majstorovic having a really good game. A couple of those guys, Elijah Moore, if he can find that shot again, this team can turn some things around and really have a successful rest of the season.
Yeah, I was actually really impressed with Kyle Cuff as well, coming off the bench. I think he made an immediate impact in the first half. It got things going for Syracuse again. His energy off the bench has been great all season long, and the guy who hasn't been given the opportunity to start, I think that starting job could come in the very near future.
We'll see if that becomes a reality once February rolls around. Another game out west against Cal coming up on Saturday, and we'll look ahead to that a little bit after a quick break here on Orange Press Pass. Don't go anywhere. We wrap things up in a moment. Stay tuned.
If you love them enough to crawl into a play place to get them to come down, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Syracuse men's basketball drops another one, their 12th loss of the season, 70-61 out west against Stanford with Nicholas Waley and Nathaniel Cunningham. I'm Sam Reis as we near the end of Orange Press Pass, but don't get too sad yet because we still got a little bit more of the show left. And let's step aside from Syracuse basketball for a moment and take a little trip around the hill and show some love to some teams all around campus here at Syracuse University, because it's what we like to call crossover crossover season. We've got lacrosse around the corner, tennis in action. It's a fun time of year, gentlemen.
It really is. I mean, really cool to see the women's basketball team get back to winning ways against a pretty decent Clemson team. They face off against UVA this weekend. So to see if Coach Jack can get her team back to where they really deserve to. Just need to put some consistent results together.
And Sam, you mentioned the fact that it's crossover season. Lacrosse is back.
Oh,
Syracuse
yeah.
men's lacrosse, potentially a national championship contender. So think about that. Got a really nice early season game against Jacksonville. Good program, 13-5 last year.
Yeah.
And then the women's squad gets in action next weekend against UAlbany, a little hometown game for me. So yeah, I'd love to get this lacrosse action going because everybody loves a little lax.
I'm actually really more interested in what's going to happen with women's lacrosse because there's just a few more question marks. Lost quite a bit of talent last season. Mille Lacs, number 2 ranked team in the country in the preseason poll, so maybe a little bit more guaranteed there, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, a lot of hype for both lacrosse squads, and perhaps both of them could get to the Final Four. It'll be a little homecoming for me at Gillette Stadium in Foxborough. We shall see. We still got a few more days before men's lacrosse kicks off its season. Still in basketball mode for now. And speaking of basketball mode, we're well underway in conference play on the men's side and the women's side for that matter. But we take a look at the men's standings as it is. Anything that stands out to you guys? Of course, it's Duke at the top. Now, NC State gave them a run for their money the other night, but it's really the Blue Devils and everyone else, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think as well. I think Louisville and Clemson, they've looked pretty consistent, and I think they're definitely going to be tournament teams. I think just the ACC overall is just a bit weaker than it was last year, which is a real shame to see. The SEC has really taken leaps and bounds this year. But then, of course, Syracuse, we need a second pace to show where they are in the ACC standings, still struggling. But then as well, look down there, Miami, a team that's had their coach resigning because of NIL and all the
crazy
implications
world
about
of college basketball.
It's been just unbelievable.
And I think the fact that Syracuse is that low on the list is unfathomable to some people. And I think the fact that this season has gone the way that it has for the Orange is really one that you just want to forget. You really want to forget about this season as soon as you can. Not a good look for the Orange.
Not a good look for the Orange. Remember, with the ACC expansion, 3 teams do not make the ACC tournament. Syracuse, as you saw right there, would be the last team in, and that's not a good sign. And that's enough for our guys Nick and Nate to sound off.
Well, the first thing for me, though, is we've seen what's happened on Twitter when it comes, and X, I should say, when it comes to Syracuse basketball, there is a vocal minority that say that Coach Red Autry should be fired. Well, I'm going to stop that right there. Stop blaming Coach Autry. The roster, yes, you can blame him for that. The construction of it hasn't been brilliant, but you've seen the adjustments he makes in games. They're good adjustments. And the recruiting, he's got a top 10 recruiting class on the way. Don't count out Coach Red Autry just yet. I think he could be good for the program in the future still.
You don't want to blame Coach Autry, Nick. I think there's a little bit of blame on the guy that's supposed to be directing this program forward. Now, don't get me wrong. I have a lot of value in the fact that Coach Adrian Autry is an excellent recruiter, which is why I just think Syracuse cannot wait till March 24th. You want to know why? That's when the transfer portal opens. The season's going to be over. You can forget about everything that's happened, and you can focus on making sure this team is as good as possible next year. The really big thing is that you have a recruiting class coming in that's headlined by Kyan Anthony and Sadiq White. But you could have guys leaving. You don't need a guy like Donnie Freeman leaving. You don't need a guy like J.J. Starling leaving. So getting both of those guys back and getting other people to the 3-on-5, proving your intention to win is really important for head coach Adrian Autry.
So, Nate, looking forward to the transfer portal at the end of March when Syracuse's season will likely be over. The reality is they still have to play more than a few games, and that next one on the slate is Cal to finish up that West Coast trip. Orange Press Pass will be at 1 a.m., so a little bit of an earlier show. You got to stay up late. But make sure you tune in after the Orange take on the Golden Bears, a Cal team that is just above 500. That should certainly be a fun one. Quick predictions, guys. Does Syracuse get it done?
No chance. Not at all.
There we go. An 0-2 trip out west, says Nick and Nate. Thank you so much for watching. For our fantastic executive producer, Gabe Perrin, my partners, Nick Waley and Nate Cunningham, I'm Sam Reis saying thanks for watching and get some sleep.